I think it's pretty fair to say that Nintendo is the most iconic video game company of all time, since over the years they've made dozens of systems with thousands of games to play on them. While most of these games are easily obtainable, there is one that's evaded even the biggest collectors: Mean Girls. But to better understand this missing product, we'll first have to learn about the system it's on, the Nintendo DS. Nintendo's first dual-screen handheld console was released in 2004, and shortly after its launch it became clear that this thing was going to be a massive hit. One of the biggest reasons for its mass appeal was the fact that Nintendo really went out of their way to promote it to women. Getting rid of the successful Game Boy brand and swapping it out with something more age and gender neutral like DS really helped them expand their market. The reason I bring this up is that since there were so many more women playing the DS, developers started to create projects specifically with them in mind. With this, companies began to dig up different IPs that they could create a game around, and this included Mean Girls. The game was first announced all the way back in 2008 during the height of the Nintendo DS craze, with many gaming outlets picking up the story, including Kotaku, who said, "If you remember, back in March, Paramount Movie Studios announced that they were getting into the gaming business. Today they've announced their first 3 titles. To be developed in conjunction with Legacy Interactive, the first 3 games, all adaptations of films obviously, will be, yes, Mean Girls, Clueless, and Pretty in Pink." So with that being said, some of you may be asking, what is Mean Girls and why would they be making a game about it? Well, the first question is easier to answer than the second. Mean Girls is a 2004 film written by Tina Fey, and honestly it's kind of a sanitized version of the 1989 movie Heathers, but still holds up in its own right. The movie involves the main character played by Lindsay Lohan becoming friends with the 3 most popular girls in her school, with plenty of drama ensuing. The movie's different from Heathers though in the sense that she doesn't befriend a young trenchcoat wearing Christian Slater who wants to kill everybody in the school. Though the plotline isn't as dark as the material it was inspired by, it's still a really solid movie that holds up. Even if you're not a teenage girl, the characters are relatable and there are plenty of jokes and gags to keep you laughing. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that it's generally perceived as a good film, but to announce a game for it 5 years after it hit theaters seemed like a strange move. Regardless of what I think though, that's what the game publisher decided to do because they thought it could make a profit. While these DS games based off of Pretty in Pink, Clueless, and Mean Girls were announced in 2008, there wasn't much talk on gaming sites about them after that, most likely due to the fact that there was a lack of interest. The following year, it was revealed that the Pretty in Pink and Clueless games were cancelled, but Mean Girls DS dodged the axe and would come out in Europe in September of 2009 and in America the following spring. With this, many websites put up pages for the game, with not many gamers noticing or caring much about it, since it was assumed to be a lousy shovelware game slapped together to make a few quick bucks from unsuspecting parents who would buy it for their daughters. So the few who even noticed that Mean Girls came out forgot about it. As time went on though, some started to realize something strange about this game, which was the fact that they couldn't find a copy of it anywhere. Mean Girls for the Nintendo DS had gone missing, and because of this, people for the first time actually became interested in the game. Right after people first started to realize that they couldn't find a copy of this Nintendo DS game, they just assumed it was never finished. But many doubted this since it had already gotten an ESRB rating, including a summary of why Mean Girls had received an E10 score. On top of this, the game's release dates were announced, websites had made pages for it, and it was never cancelled. Through a little more searching, people were able to discover an Italian website called multiplayer.it that had 5 screenshots of Mean Girls DS. The first is a dancing game that looks similar to Elite Beat Agents, the second is air hockey, the third has you lighting off fireworks, the fourth looks like the player is throwing paper airplanes at the teacher when she isn't looking, and finally the fifth has you, I actually have no clue what's going on there. All this turned many skeptics of the game's existence into believers since it seems very clear the game was completed. But you may be asking, if the game did get released, why are there no copies available? Well, the main answer to that is that this may have been one of the worst selling video games of all time. First of all, the late 2000s was probably the absolute worst time to concoct a Mean Girls game, considering the amount of controversy surrounding the star of the film, Lindsay Lohan. Gone were the days of her being the young and beautiful star we see in Mean Girls. By the time of the game's launch, she was all over the news for her court appearances, DUI charges, violating her parole, warrants for her arrest, going to rehab, attacking a woman, attacking another woman, doing cocaine, going to jail, getting out of jail before going back to jail again, stealing jewelry, hitting a man with her car, hitting another man with her car, fighting her mother, and being detained for not doing her required community service. If you notice, they didn't even include her in the box art of the game, which is strange considering she is the main character of the movie it's based on. On top of this, another factor to consider for why it wouldn't sell well is that this game was late in the Nintendo DS's life cycle. In 2009, the handheld device was getting old, and the new 3DS was on its way. Also, the crowd of people that would play a game like Mean Girls was quickly moving over to mobile games like Angry Birds that they could play on their tablets and phones. The second explanation for how this game is missing is that unlike Mario or Zelda, there aren't going to be people going out of their way on day one to get Mean Girls DS. As mentioned earlier, the market for these types of games was parents picking up birthday presents for their 8-year-old daughter. But with an E10 rating and a game starring Lindsay Lohan, this was a hard sell to that group, leading to this video game being wanted by basically no one. So here's my theory. If there was no hype for the game and it was such a huge flop in Europe, which was the first market to receive it, they may have never bothered releasing it in the United States. In this scenario, there may only be a handful of copies in existence somewhere in Europe. This theory is backed up by the website GameFAQ, which claims that the game was cancelled in the United States. At this point, that handful of copies would be sitting in the back of teenage girls' closets, and that group is not the type known to be talking about missing video games on the internet. Also, if it was only released in Europe, that would mean a good portion of the copies would be sold in non-English speaking countries. I bring this up because any efforts to find the game so far seems to be mainly from Americans, so we may not be reaching many populations that could have a copy sitting in the bottom of a bargain bin at their local game store in Italy or France or Spain. Even with all that being said, I did see some claims that the game appeared in America as well. One commenter that went by Mr. Jiggin said, "I actually did see a copy of this exact title about 2 years ago in my local mayor's store. It was one of their pre-owned games that they sold for $7.50. They actually re-wrapped it in shrink wrap. I was unaware of the game's reputation or else I would have purchased it. Unfortunately, Mayor stopped selling these pre-owned games quite some time ago. However, I did see this. I might ask someone over there if the game could somehow be in their warehouse." To add on to this, I just asked my brother if he remembered seeing this game in the store and he said yes. Apparently we didn't buy it because it looked like a bad game and instead got Sonic Rush. Of course this is the internet and Mr. Jiggin could be, lying for no reason, but it only leads to more speculation about if and where this game came out. Through my research, one thing I noticed that made this all seem like a troll was the fact that the game's release date in Europe was 9/11 and in the United States 4/20. If you don't know, these are the two go-to dates people online will often use in a sarcastic manner, since September 11th is when the World Trade Centers were knocked down and 4/20 is a day people are known to smoke weed. Oh, and it's also Hitler's birthday and the day the Columbine massacre happened. At first I thought somebody was just messing around, but as I looked further, those are the supposed dates the game was to be released according to plenty of different websites. To just make sure though, I checked a calendar since games usually come out on Fridays in Europe and Tuesdays in America, and yep, the dates make sense in that regard as well. It just seems too good to be true. Of course, there is one other possibility to consider, which is that this game was pulled right before being released, and since no one seemed to care about it in the first place, they just swept the project under the rug with no one noticing or asking questions. And even if this is the case, it's very likely that the game was completed or came close to completion, meaning there may be a ROM of it somewhere. I tried emailing the companies that were involved with this title, but no one has gotten back to me yet. To be fair, the people working at companies like 505 Games now may not have a clue what I'm talking about if they're only focused on answering questions about their current projects. Nevertheless, I'm sure there's somebody that knows the truth about this mysterious title. Even though we haven't been able to find the game for the DS, a version of it was actually released for the PC in the OMG High School Bundle, which was definitely a name given to it by a middle-aged man. The pack included games for Clueless, Pretty in Pink, and yes, Mean Girls. While I can't say for sure that this is similar to the DS version in any way, this one has you playing against other high schoolers in a matching puzzle game. Along with this, they also throw in some RPG elements and a customizable character. Perhaps the handheld version threw in mini-games on top of this, or it's also possible that the two projects have absolutely nothing in common. I'm honestly kind of surprised that I've been able to write a script this long about a game that there's almost no information for. While researching this video, I discovered that there wasn't really much of a search for this game so far, so it is believable that people have seen this game at a yard sale or a flea market and they just ignored it because they thought it was just another shovelware game for the Nintendo DS like all the others. I also looked around to see if I could find anybody that was a collector of Nintendo DS games to see if they had a full collection and ask them about Mean Girls, but surprisingly no one really collects Nintendo DS games, so there's not an expert or somebody that would be looking for this game actively. Since there are still no answers to our questions, I say that you could possibly contact 505 Games. They never got back to me, but they did publish it supposedly, and maybe if enough people reach out to them, they'll give us a response. Their headquarters are in Milan, so if anybody speaks Italian, maybe you could reach out to them there, and somebody there that I wasn't able to talk to may have some information. If any new info emerges, I'll be sure to make an update video to let you know what happened to Mean Girls DS. So until next time, thank you for watching. Hello?